the largest crowd that had ever gathered to hear Jesus. The Bible says it this way, recorded in the Gospel of Luke. Meanwhile, with a multitude of many thousands, according to this translation, King James says an innumerable company. But we know also that the word means at least 10,000. So you get the picture, because they only numbered men, and you have the women and children in addition to that. So Jesus is there with a crowd of 30 or 40,000 people, and Jesus now begins to teach them. He said a few things to his disciples privately. Then he began to teach the multitudes that were there. And as Jesus taught them, he now moved to what they were to do. They had come there to see him, no doubt a curiosity to many of them. Maybe some came because they had heard the stories and had gotten out hoping for free food. We don't know why all of them were there, but Jesus now makes an appeal to them and gives them instructions of what they are to do. These are the words that Jesus spoke. I tell you, everyone who confesses me before men. You see, what were they to do when they went home? They heard all the message of Jesus. They heard the things that Jesus was sharing with them. But now, what were they to do? Jesus says, when you go back home, I want to tell you that you must tell others that you now believe in me. You have to share, not all the teachings that Jesus gave, but Jesus said you must share with them your belief in me. I tell you, everyone who confesses me before men, him will the Son of Man also confess before the angels of God. Jesus said, look, see the connection that he drew? Jesus said, when you go back, your responsibility, your job is to share with everyone else that you believe in me. And if you do that, Jesus said, when I'm in heaven, I will do the same thing for you before the angels that are in heaven. Do you remember that Jesus also said that when the Son of Man comes, he will send his angels from one corner of the earth to the other, around the globe, to gather together his elect. Jesus was informing them that if you now will go home and you'll tell everyone that you believe in me, you have accepted me as Messiah, I will tell the angels, so that on that last great gathering day, they will know who you are, because I have told them I know you. But Jesus also then added a warning. If you do not go back home and share with everyone your belief in me, I will not share with the angels that I know you. You see, there's a correspondence there between our willingness to acknowledge Jesus to the world and share our hope in him, and his willingness now to bring us into his everlasting kingdom. But Jesus moved beyond that. It's one thing to go home and say to others, hey, can you imagine? Go with me back in that time if you would. Today we all know about Jesus, right? But back then they didn't. And so when these people went home, then they were sharing with people that had never heard of this strange man. They were bearing witness to him and what he could do for them. But today, of course, we know who Jesus is. And it's easy to say, I believe in him, or even share with another Christian that's not part of our spiritual community and share with them a belief in Jesus. But Jesus now goes a step beyond that. And Jesus said, you've got to be ready. Now, they must have been thinking, remember, these people didn't know Jesus very much. They didn't have the Bible to read like we do today. And so Jesus now says to them, you have to be ready. Well, in their mind, obviously, they're going to ask the question, be ready for what? But Jesus tells them, let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. And in their minds, that must have been rolling over. What is he talking about? You know, have my loins girded. By the way, the loins thing, we go to Hebrews, it helps a little bit. For when he was yet in the loins of his father, when Melchizedek met him. So you get the idea. What Jesus is saying is, I want you to get your running shorts on or your walking shorts on and be ready to go. And those people that day, those thousands of people, must have been saying to themselves, why are we getting prepared to go? Where are we headed to? But Jesus said, look, I want you to act like you are ready and prepared to go at any moment. So let your loins be girded about and let your lights be burning. Why? Because you might have to leave at night and you don't want to go without your flashlight. So we can see now that Jesus is telling these individuals that you have to always be ready and prepared to go. It is somewhat, in a way, a metaphor that Jesus is using here. But also in other ways, this is very literal. Jesus is telling them things are going to change and you have to be willing to go. So you have to now go home and share with everyone that you believe in me as Messiah. But now Jesus is helping them understand that you have to move from that thought to the idea and the concept that everything is about to change. And you have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. Then Jesus started telling them some other things. He said, look, it may happen at night. And so he uses that as an illustration that at nighttime, most of us aren't prepared to go. Because it's nighttime, we go to sleep. It's time to rest. We don't anticipate going anywhere. Have you ever driven all night? I've driven all night a number of times. It's not a fun experience. But in any case, in this illustration that Jesus is using, Jesus says you have to always be awake. Once again, he's talking about the preparation to leave. And so Jesus says you can never go to sleep because you have to always be ready to leave. Notice the urgency now with Jesus is pushing on those individuals that were listening to him. That now they were buying into an entirely different way of thinking and a new life. Now they believed in him. They had to share that with others. And then that meant that they were ready to go. And so that would have to be shared with others as well, right? Well, why are you prepared? Where are you going? Well, I don't know, but I'm going where Jesus has told me I'm going to go. Then Jesus develops that as Jesus says to them, therefore be ready also, for the Son of Man is coming. And we all know this passage so well, don't we? Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is coming when? When's he coming? Say it. When is he coming? At an hour when you do not expect him. Jesus is saying to those that confessed their belief in him to go that one step farther and act like they believe in him and his promise to return. Jesus is pulling from that Old Testament story, that story that we know so well. The people of Israel were held as captives in bondage in Egypt. And Moses said to them the same thing that Jesus later would say, get your loins girded, because it's about to happen. And thus you shall eat it, talking about the Passover, with your loins girded. If we believe and we're willing to go beyond that confession, our lives should demonstrate that our loins are girded and we are prepared for the return of Jesus. Are we ready? Boy, life gets so involved, doesn't it? I mean, all of those things that we have to do every day. When Jesus comes again, there are no excuses. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to get ready to go. And so Jesus now draws on that Old Testament story, and he tells those that were listening, I want you to go back and share with everyone, but don't just share it, act like you believe it and that you are ready and prepared to go. Some people make all kinds of legalistic things out of this. Oh, if I don't eat cheese or whatever, that I've got my life prepared for Jesus. Jesus is not talking about that. Jesus is talking about your enthusiasm for him and your willingness to share it with the world and your demonstration that you are looking enthusiastically for him to come again, more concerned about his return than we are about the things of our everyday life. So Jesus, now drawing from that illustration that we have back in the Old Testament, said, be girded up. And when the people of Israel left, there was a large group that left with them. Back in the book of Zechariah, that great prophetic book of Zechariah in the Old Testament, notice this message that Zechariah left for the people at the end of time. This is an end time prophecy. Watch this. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days, that is in the last days, the end of time, it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all languages of the nations. So now Zechariah, looking at the end of time, you remember John, when he talks about those that are redeemed, he says there are people from every language, nation, tribe, and people that are gathered together. Zechariah, foreseeing that day, says there are people from all various languages and nations But notice what they do. There are 10 of them, even that shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew. 10 people hanging on to one person saying, let us go with you. Why? Here it is. Saying, we will go with you, for we have heard what? We have heard that God is with you. How will people know to go with us if we don't confess to them our belief in Jesus and we don't live a life of enthusiastic looking forward to the return of Jesus? How will they ever have any desire at all to go with us? Look, you can tell people all day long about cheese, okay? I'm picking on that. You put in there whatever you want to. Nobody is ever going to follow anyone to heaven because they cut back on their cheese. But they will follow us into heaven if we enthusiastically believe and look forward to the redemption that Jesus has promised. And if we live in such a way that we expect Him every moment of every day, even at the most inopportune time that we may not expect Him. It's easy for us to say, well, look, it's been all these years and Jesus hasn't come back yet, and so the flame in our life begins to go low. You may remember that Jesus reproved there in the book of Revelation, another one of those end-time prophecies. He says, I have somewhat against you because your first love has grown cold. If we are not enthusiastic about the return of Jesus, people are not going to gather around with us and say, God is with you. It's only when we live like we are ready to go, then they will be ready to go with us. You remember back in that COVID stuff? There were several of these politicians. Some of them the biggest people on the closed down. I'm not getting all the COVID dynamics. Just get that aside. But they were people that were, they were the biggest ones that shut everything down, shut all the churches down and all of that. And then you remember the news reports about them going out and having parties with hundreds of people with no mask on. And then what did you think? Those people really don't believe what they're talking about. So if we say to someone, oh, I believe in Jesus, but then we don't act like we expect Him to return any moment, why would they want to follow us? But this great prophecy here that we have in Zechariah says at the end of time that obviously God's people are going to be so convinced and so enthusiastic about where they are going, others are going to say, God is with you. I want to go with you to be with Jesus. God has given us a great opportunity, a better opportunity than anybody has had in the history of the world, to demonstrate that we really, truly believe that Jesus can come any moment to take us home with Him. By God's grace, we will live like we believe it. Would you stand with me?